So just wanted to do a little book report. I, for kind of boredom in retirement, and kind of casting about for something to occupy my time. I landed on. Well, first I said, okay, let me check out the library, and my housemate had pointed out to me, oh, the Yeltsin National Library, now just renamed to the Russian National Library, Southern Branch, I guess, of what do we call this here, St. Petersburg, I guess. That there it was, nice big building. Um, so I went there one day and met with the librarian for socioeconomic affairs, and he didn't speak much English. I didn't speak much Russian, but between us or Google Translate, whatever, and my primitive Russian, he helped me out. And one of the books he recommended, probably one of the leading books on the topic, published after the destruction of the Soviet Union, and probably one of the, it seems like one of the better, more honest accounts that I haven't really searched, so we'll just say that I've found now, or thanks to this librarian. It's the author is I.S. Ratkowski. The Red Terror and the Activities of the VCheck or Cheka, or the Emergency Commission for the Suppression of Counter-Revolution, Speculation and Sabotage, or whatever, in the year of 1919. My interest is pretty much the initial revolutionary period, which runs from 1918 to 1922. But this is a good sort of focus, and I'll have to follow up and see. I don't think the author has published more beyond 1918. I'll have to double check on that. I think he might have focused then on the period of the 30s, and then I think there's like analyses of numbers repressed from what the heck, 1920 through the 30s. But that kind of skips 1918 to, 1920. But, most of that period, I guess you can say, has been covered by academics and specialists at this point, 30 years after the destruction of the Soviet Union. And, these numbers are very contentious. On the one hand, what I would call Stalinists say, well, it was very peaceful and the liberals are lying. Those liberals lie. And then the liberals are like, oh, Stalin ate babies and murdered, most of the country. And but thankfully, we have, I guess it's Professor Ratkowski, who seems to be, honest and conscientious in his research and his assessments. And I ended up actually, I guess this is a whole description now of the process, which is pretty interesting. I think for people who haven't been to the former Soviet Union or haven't engaged with actual former Soviet intellectuals, I guess here is what I've done is more at the kind of what Gramsci might call the frontline intellectuals. Not necessarily those who've done the deep historical research themselves, but have read the research and can make recommendations and I guess discuss it somewhat. So my second trip or whatever, second step, I saw that the library, the original library was down around Nevsky Prospect metro stop, basically right in the center. It's Centralny of Petrograd, Leningrad, whatever. And so I said, well, gee, from where I'm at in northern Leningrad, that's more convenient, and it's historical, so let me go check it out. So I went there, and one of the specialists, again in the socioeconomic department, but in the downtown branch, the guy I spoke to there, he had actually done excavations of counter-revolutionary shot at the Peter Paul Fortress here in town. And he said, yeah, basically there were about 100 bodies there. And then we went to speak with the specialist on repressions in the Soviet Republic, Soviet Union. And, my question was, well, for 1918 to 1922, the initial revolutionary period in Petrograd, how many does he estimate, or do the experts estimate, were shot or, killed, whatever, drowned, whatever, repressed? And he said, with the death penalty, and he said 10,000. And frankly, I was shocked. I mean, given the population in let's say 16, 17, was probably about 2.4, maybe it was 2.6 million here. And then, because of the imperialist attack on the Soviet Republic and Petrograd in particular, the population declined to 400,000 by, I think it was like 1920 or 22, probably 22. But, if you average that out roughly, that's somewhere between under 2% to under 4%, depending on how you count the population. Probably closer to under 2%. Yeah, of the population that was given the death penalty in the repressions against the capitalist counter-revolution here. And I found that shockingly low. In Yalta, by contrast, about 20% of Yalta was given the death penalty. And I guess, Yalta was pretty infamous for basically, something, if you get the peer of Yalta, that meant, the revolutionaries were going to kill you. That was like a phrase that was, I guess, widely known back in the day. Because so many people in Yalta, they were basically feudal parasites and I guess even capitalists and counter-revolutionaries, officers or whatever, or cops. They fled south, and then Crimea was like the last point before you jumped on a ship and went to probably Turkey and then off to the west to escape. Well, those who stayed behind or for whatever reason, there were enough nobles, number one, and then I guess officers of the old Tsarist regime, and then I think even cops, that they got, I think it was 5,000 were basically shot or drowned, 1918 to 1922, out of 20,000, I was told. I mean, for whatever that's worth, I guess that's maybe believable. Yeah, it was half the number of Petrograd. So that's high. That's probably 20% of the major towns and cities, especially Yalta, where it was a resort town for the Tsarist elite. The mayor was with the Black Hundreds, like the clan of the day, connected with the monarchy and the Orthodox Church. So, a lot of bad people down there at that time. The trash was taken out. It was like the butthole of the Tsarist Empire. So, but here, even in St. Petersburg, even though it was a center historically of, Tsarist economic political power and then capitalist economic political power, by contrast, it was 1/10 of the number killed, if the figures are accurate. I was really surprised. Kind of disappointed, because coming from Chicago, my estimate is half that city is directly or indirectly dirty. But maybe I'm too pessimistic. I don't know. I have a very low tolerance for people who come to shit on my land. On that side of the family. So, and you wipe your ass with the Bill of Rights, and you shit all over social democracy, even and trade unions. You know, I want nothing but to shoot you, or fucking put you in a gulag for 25 years. But that aside, how many scumbags are in Chicago? What percent of Chicago are scumbags? I mean, it's a lot. I guess that's another question: is how many got the bullet or were drowned in a shithole like Odessa? Which is probably comparable to Chicago in terms of criminality and reaction. So, that'd be an interesting question. But anyway, on to the book. So Ratkowski writes that initially, the Bolshevik leadership, Lenin, Zinoviev, et al., thought that the counter-revolution was going to be short-lived, and that organized repression was not going to be necessary because, again, the overwhelmingly, like, the bourgeoisie in Russia was weak and still is, and the workers, it was the highest concentration of workers in the world. It's like China is today in like the Shenzhen southern zones, overwhelming concentrations of workers, and then peasants beyond that, and most of the peasants were objectively anti-czarist. So they were like, well, we're the overwhelming majority here. These counter-revolutionaries, they're weak, so they're not going to be able to... Oops, bang my folder. They're not going to be able to mount an effective counter-revolution. Well, they were wrong in part. So... to start with the officers of the old regime and then the civil servants, led by cadets politically, the cadet political party, I guess, which are equivalent to like liberals in the West. They mounted violent resistance and sabotage. They would just, if you've ever interacted with like a bureaucracy, anywhere in the world, you know that, if you get a malicious bureaucrat, they can, like, stonewall and drag things out and basically deny you for years upon years. So, basically, and Marx and Engels had even said, whatever it was, 50, 80 years before the October Revolution, when we get into power, these civil servants, when they start to sabotage, we're going to have to basically shoot them and threaten to shoot them until they act right. So that was the Bolsheviks' approach was, okay, you're fired. and then, well, anyway, so moving on. And the left SRs, the socialist revolutionaries, initially the left wing of that party, I guess, which was sort of like anti-czarist, socialist, but more oriented towards the peasantry and kind of, loose organizationally, ideologically, basically saying, well, we just have to kind of argue our way into, a socialist republic and beyond capitalism, which, was totally abstract and unrealistic. And so, in the face of organized resistance, the use of violence by officers and sabotage by the civil servants, and speculation also was a problem by the merchants of, Russia. And, they jack up the prices, kind of like they're doing in America now, except more so, I guess, maybe. And then also you had criminals taking advantage of, the weakening of central, governmental authority. Criminals, I think I said. And they made an alliance with anarchists who would give them sort of political cover for their criminal activity. And then you had criminals engaging, they'd break open, they'd rob wine stores and get drunk and carry out pogroms. And usually that means against Jews at that time, who were, a minority and had good politics generally. So then, and then you had the right socialist revolutionaries, and they were against any sort of what they would call a coup against, the provisional government of, that was them, the right socialist revolutionaries led by Kerensky. And they, in January 1918, this was, December, January, like 2 months after the overthrow of the capitalist government in Russia, the right SRs, the former government party members, they attempted to kill Lenin, and one of them fired 7 shots into his car, but, missed him. But, again, the workers were so dominant in Petrograd here that for fear of, the rage of the workers basically probably spontaneously lynching them, if they managed to assassinate Lenin, they stopped trying. And then at a certain point, I don't have the date here, but maybe by January, I think it was maybe before, I don't know, the Constituent Assembly, which was like the capitalist assembly, was made auxiliary to the Soviets, and then they were dispersed. Basically, they didn't represent the country. The elections had been held before the revolution, the workers' revolution, and so the assembly was basically a bunch of lawyers and merchants and, liberal wanks, and they were like, okay, go home. Well, the liberals got violent, and 12 were killed in Petrograd, 15 in Moscow, and then, again, they attempted to assassinate, this time, Uritsky, who was on the emergency military staff. Actually, Uritsky became the head of the Petrograd Cheka. Sounds like physically he resembled me. They called him the Small Bear. And what else? I trained with one of his descendants, I guess it was, who was from here years ago in Chicagoland, and then he left and became a medical doctor in the Pacific Northwest. So he denounced his ancestry, another idiot, liberal Russian idiot, but, tragically, or whatever it is, history. That's the way these descendants often go, right? So, and then in Novgorod, there was armed resistance to the revolutionary government until January 22nd. So all this probably happened in like January. So, but the armed superiority of the Bolsheviks and the workers deterred the right SRs, and the revolutionary government decided, repression and violence was not necessary. And so, however, January 5th, in Moscow, the right SRs carried out terror attacks. They blew up the district council building for the revolutionary government. They killed 5, including the head of the regional arsenal. And then January 30th, they killed... in January they killed 30 and injured 200. There were snipers they put up in Red Square at a workers' demonstration commemorating Bloody Sunday, which was back in 1905. And then from there on, the Emergency Commission basically for public safety. The Cheka, they made preventative arrests in future of these sorts of counter-revolutionaries because it got to the point where they're like, all right, we have to take more positive steps. Meanwhile, in Kiev, there was the arsenal factory, which I guess was, relatively famous as a point of, basically Soviet and then Bolshevik support. And the counter-revolutionaries shot 700 workers in the factory. And in response, Muravyov, with the Cheka, I believe it was, maybe shot 1,000 to 2,000 counter-revolutionaries and robbers in the Red Army. Got into a bit of trouble for that. That was in, January 1918, but by the spring that was viewed as sort of like, maybe an excess, but it was, in terms of the way the struggle went, not unnecessary. So, and then the interesting part also was crime. Maybe I'll stop it there, though, and continue.